you, Joe, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming today. There's nothing more daunting than being asked to give a speech and not being given a subject. So, as chance would have it, I'm very lucky to have become deputy in 2015, straddling perhaps the most important anniversary I'll ever live to see, and the most important decision our nation will ever face. I may have struggled perhaps if I was made deputy as someone that clearly loves sport in 2012 in the shadow of the Olympics, not unless it was on a sport like Greco-Roman wrestling, which I take a healthy interest in. The anniversary I'm talking about is of course that of Magna Carta, and the decision our nation will soon face is of course the referendum on our continued membership of the European Union. A referendum which could set us free, or it could embed our unwanted governors even further in unelected authority. 800 years ago this year, on the 16th of June, England was divided. It asked itself who it was and how it should be governed and who should govern it. We had a bad king. We fast forward to now, 800 years later, and we find ourselves again in a situation where we ask ourselves as a country who we are and how we should be governed. Who should govern us? This time we've got a lovely monarch, but she has a bad government. Indeed, she has two bad governments, the real one in Brussels and the one that pretends it's the real one in Westminster. The answer to the question 800 years ago was a document drafted on parchment by rebellious barons in the meadows of Runnymede just outside of London. Written in water, dust and oak apple powder, it sought to deny the absolute authority of the king, to subject him to the same laws, and perhaps without knowing, it laid the foundation for the Britain we know today. That Britain is a country that the other parties try their damned hardest to abolish. And the only difference between them, conference, is the speed with which they wish to do it. The Tories over a couple of decades, and the Greens, if you care to read their manifesto, overnight. I hope you don't think I'm being melodramatic, conference, when I say that I joined UKIP because I've refused to give up on that country. I refuse to let such a country with its liberties, freedom and splendour just die on its feet. Because it is those liberties and freedoms which make me a Briton. As much as the elite would have us believe that being British is about queuing, or tea, or fish and chips, or corgis, or Stephen Fry, it isn't. Our culture, quiet and understated, but rich in the word, is but an impression, a silhouette of what we really are. An older colleague of mine from my branch said it best when he recalled one history lesson as a boy. The history master began the lesson quite solemnly, as if passing on a great weapon onto his students. This is what makes you British. Habeas corpus, your right to a fair trial, the state not being able to try you twice, the state not being able to seize your property, the rule of law, the non-existence of arbitrary power and justice. It's little wonder, ladies and gentlemen, why British Constitution hasn't been taught properly in our schools since the 1970s. That lesson took place only 50 years ago, and since then our governments in both Westminster and Brussels have chipped away at each of these fundamentals until none exist. It's of course no accident either that the crypto-Marxist Green Party wishes to make the concept of British national irrelevant. When you make being British irrelevant, you make the rights that come with being British irrelevant. Instead, I'm proud to belong to a party and a youth movement that intends to get them back. We're very lucky to be alive when your nation makes great decisions about its future path. Is perhaps the greatest privilege and responsibility that can be bestowed upon a proud and patriotic citizen. It doesn't come along very often, ladies and gentlemen. In this country, Magna Carta was one example, the English Civil War another, the Reformation, the Glorious Revolution. Economically, we've had the Industrial Revolution and Thatcherism. The paths we have now before us are very simple and clear. We can continue on a path to terminal decline, locked within a corporatist supranational dictatorship, to be what Peter Hitchens describes as a low-wage economy kept bearable by cheap credit, and what he also describes as a miserable liberal German empire, where Tesco and other multinationals decide what's best for you and your family, where we watch as one by one our institutions are destroyed from within, where common law is replaced with civil code, where the state is our master and not our servant. Or we can vote no in the referendum and live in a free, prosperous and independent country, once again able to make our own laws, where the state is our servant, not our master. Yeah. Either way, the upcoming referendum is an existential question posed to the people of Britain, and just as the rebel barons and their army forced King John to accept their terms in the meadows of Runnymede, our people's army has forced Cameron to give our people a say. But we must be careful not to fool ourselves in what we're up against. The EU is backed by people and organisations with immense amounts of money, influence and power. The recent tragic charade in Greece has shown that we quite simply no longer live in a true democracy. Cameron's decision already to ensure the fight for this referendum, like in 1975, is not fair, proves this. And as those barons were rebels, so are we dissidents in a regime that would really rather we weren't here. And I'll say that again. If you're in this hall and have a purple and yellow card in your pocket, you are not simply a party member or an activist. You have removed yourself from the consensus. The settled view is not your view. You have a contempt for so-called experts, and you have signed up for bringing down a corrupt regime and all its apologists, flunkies, yes-men and quislings, numerous, well-paid and well-bribed. You are a dissident, at least you are if you're doing it properly. Indeed, already this weekend, I've heard of a Wire member being telephoned after a job interview to be asked why he is in UKIP. We have the whole establishment against us. So sure were the corporatists, the left and their allies that this country was taking their path, they cannot stand the fact that we've come along to muck it up. Their contempt for the thoughts and opinions of the people betrays their own contempt for freedom, their own desire to police people's thoughts, and their own love of arbitrary rule and a big tyrannical state. And you know, Conference, with politics like theirs, I don't mind them trying to keep us down. I'd be more worried if I had their respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Contempt for freedom, of course, isn't new. Bentham, the father of utilitarianism, a political science which I hope every UKIP member recoils from as much as I do, also sneered in his day at what he called the cult of Magna Carta. Some people do this now, believing it to be an irrelevant historical artefact which only a small number of enthusiasts and eccentrics believe in. Self-loathing lefties cringe at its mention. What an awful thing to suggest about something so beautiful. But this is because of our own complacency. And the beauty of Magna Carta is it doesn't go away. It's a persistent component of our legal and political discourse, and the only time it isn't is when we stop talking about it. And that is why events like the anniversary this year are so important, and yet the 16th of June passed with hardly a mention. So how do we as a youth wing keep talking about it? And why is Magna Carta pertinent to us? Why am I talking about it? How do we make this old document, which contains everything from the clearing of fish weirs to the return of Welsh hostages, relevant? We do so because the spirit of it is quite simple and cuts to our very core as a party. That is to rein in the absolute power of the state. We are the party of Magna Carta, and indeed we were the only youth wing to even bother about it. I was delighted to see so many YIs attending the Magna Carta event I arranged in London. My pleasure wasn't just that the attendance was good, with young people coming all the way from Manchester and even Scotland and Wales, but it was the sense that we weren't just commemorating an episode in our history, we were looking to the freedoms in our future. Can you imagine another youth week in which you would hear the discussions, which we are going to hear today and tomorrow? Can you imagine the young Greens talking about freedom? Have you heard any debates about secret courts or mass surveillance or privacy being taken up during the Labour leadership campaign? I've heard that the Tories have something called Conservatives for Liberty. They would do well to pay attention to what their own Home Secretary is doing. Yeah. No freeman shall be taken or imprisoned, or be disseised of his freehold, or liberties, or free customs, or be outlawed or exiled, or any otherwise destroyed, nor will we pass upon him, nor condemn him, but by the lawful judgment of his peers, or by the law of the land. We shall sell to no man, we shall not deny or defer to any man, either justice or right. That was a clause which survived hundreds of years before the last government had accidentally on purpose made it meaningless with the European arrest warrant. Potentially the most important passage on our statutes. No parliamentarian has recently shown so much contempt for it as the Right Honourable Theresa May. It's up to us, therefore, to take up the mantle of Magna Carta, and it's up to us in this important year, in the run-up to the referendum, to take its message to every school, every campus and every college. It's a message that resonates with people of all backgrounds, because it has a depth and authenticity which the other messages from the other parties lack. It's a message that pumps blood into the heart of every young radical. And so what I say now to the young people outside of this hall is this. If you're a young person who is worried about the increasing size and power of the state, who feels let down by the other parties, Y is here for you. If you fear the police no longer keep the peace, but enforce the politics of the day while trawling through people's Twitter accounts, we're here for you. If you're worried about privacy, we're here for you. If you're a young entrepreneur who is struggling because of the tax systems and red tape which favour big business, we're here for you. If you're a young black man affected by arbitrary stop and search, we're here for you. If you're a young Scotswoman who thinks the SNP doesn't speak for her, we're here for you. If you're a young Christian worried you will soon be criminalised for following your conscience, a young LGBT person who doesn't want to be used by the left, a young student worried about the free speech on your campus, we're here for you. And if you just want to be able to use WhatsApp without being assumed to be a terrorist, we're here for you. Sometimes, when it does get quite hard, as it does, I do think of the people I grew up with in the East End, who I see struggling to make ends meet, struggling to get a hospital appointment, finding their wages slashed, finding it hard to bring up their young families. We're here for them too. Because as the feminist Helena Normanton, the first woman in this country to practice as a barrister, said of Magna Carta, its enduring importance was at its heart was an element of hope. I look around this hall now and I see people who can write well, people who can speak well, people with great organisational skills, good debaters and seasonal campaigners. The time to use these skills is right now, because we have to continue as a youth wing to give young people that hope. Thank you.